Hi, I'm Josh. Today on Make It, we have Brooke Shaden, a fine art photographer and self-portrait artist. She'll be sharing her approach to transforming photos captured in her home into surreal scenes. This week on Make It. Hey, Brooke.
Hey.
I would love to maybe hear from you, like what kind of work that you do.
My work is very surreal. Some of it is more whimsical and some of it is very dark and serious and conceptual. So it's a mix of all those things. But in general, I'm a fine art photographer and I'm a self-portrait artist first and foremost. So my work is very much me in the image, although I don't see it as me at all. So it's a character in a scene that I'm creating that comes totally from my imagination.
What is it like to see yourself as different people or different things?
Well, I think that's the key actually, is to see yourself as someone else, because it forces you to see your life as a story and yourself as a character, and you can sort of craft it to be whatever you want.
How do you even come up with these concepts though? For example, this woman in the water with a lantern.
Yeah.
Is this something that just sprang forth in your mind, or?
You know, sometimes that happens where you have that lightning moment, but I very much don't believe in relying on those moments. So for this image, for example, I remember I was at this event and I was just hearing from so many people how they feel like their lives are filled with darkness and all these terrible things are happening. And I remember thinking, I want to be able to create something for someone that will give them hope or just represent how they feel. So I created this image of a lantern in the water where maybe somebody's being pulled down into darkness, but they're bringing their own light to the situation, no matter how improbable that is. That's my favorite thing, is to create that universal emotion.
Are these parts of your own personality, or are these projections of other personalities, or how does that come about?
I've always had this love for literature and analyzing symbols. So when I'm coming up with an image, I'm always basing it in where my heart is, which is darkness, and finding beauty in that darkness. But at the same time, I'm saying, okay, now how is this color red going to translate to other people? What will you associate with red? What will someone in another country associate with red?
Finding beauty in darkness, that seems like, as you mentioned, a core tenet in a lot of your work.
Yes.
But beyond that, is there other things that you want to give to people?
When I started, I had so many specific ideas of, this is what this picture means, and if people don't get that, then they must be stupid, because I thought it was so obvious, because it's coming from me and it's my vision,
you,
of
right?
course.
It's not only is it coming from you, but it's actually is you.
Yeah, exactly. And when people didn't get it, I didn't understand why they didn't get it. And then I started to realize that my ideas weren't necessarily the thing that was that important to me. What was important was communicating a feeling that other people could internalize and feel connected through it. As long as somebody feels something, I'm happy.
Creating your art, and then the fact that you're putting this out there, this is the way that you realized that art was something that has an impact on other individuals.
Oh, definitely. I was creating images, putting them online, and I was very self-absorbed at this point. So I wanted it to be my vision. I don't care what you think, but also, if you don't think anything, then I get freaked out. Like, oh my gosh, well, this picture must not be good if nobody's saying anything about it. And I remember for the first time I went online and I looked at this picture that I had uploaded and I was like, oh, I don't have as many comments and people aren't liking it. So I took it down, and then the next day somebody emailed me and they said, where's that picture that you uploaded yesterday? And I just wrote back and I said, oh, it wasn't a great photo, and I took it off of my site. And she said, oh, that's too bad, because I actually had a miscarriage last week and this image really made me feel healed by looking at it. And that's when I completely changed my mentality of how I was creating and how I was sharing. It went from being very selfish to thinking not just about what I want, but how can I help people through my art?
Are there any other ways that you found that your art can
support? Definitely. The first way that I found was when I traveled to India, and I started working with an organization called Blossomy. And this was an organization that was in Calcutta, India, and she was just giving creative workshops to survivors of human trafficking through shelter homes and things like that. She asked me if I would come and give a workshop, and I did. And this workshop ended up morphing into not just this is how you take pictures, but this is how you express your story. So I started to teach these workshops. I eventually opened a school in India and then in Thailand, teaching photography to these girls coming out of shelter homes. And the goal of all of this is to say, if you have something to express, then you should be able to express that, and let's give that tool to people who are in need.
Right.
And you know, it's just as simple as that. It doesn't have to be a fancy camera. It could be your cell phone. I've taught girls with just their little cell phones, you know, how to set up the timer and everything, and it's just a beautiful thing. And that's what I want my art to communicate, is you're not alone.
I would love to take another look at some more of your stuff,
Yeah.
and maybe even, I think you were gonna show us how you make some of your work.
Yes, I would love to.
Let's go check that out.
Okay, good.
Can you show us how you do your magic?
So my process can be reduced into 4 steps, which is compositing, lighting, coloring, and texture. So it's really, really simple. So the first few steps I'll just show here. It's really just a matter of
You
asking.
just added in like the
ladder, yeah, just saying what needs to happen for the final composition. So I took a shot of the ladder by itself and added that in later just by cutting and pasting and blending. And then I used the fanciest tool in Photoshop, which is the brush tool.
That is a really fancy tool.
I know, and I just painted black everywhere. And then I had this stock image of clouds, which I added in, which I shot from an airplane. I just made sure that the perspective matched and everything was going to blend nicely. And up to this point, all I'm doing is layer masking. Just a soft brush with a layer mask, and that's it. As you can see, I did go through this step of changing the dress color really drastically.
Yeah.
And that's
But
probably...
it's the same exact dress. It's not like it.
Same
'cause
dress.
I thought that it was like a different dress.
Yeah, no.
So you just use the curves tool to
Exactly.
like colorize
Exactly.
the dress. Got
Yeah,
it.
and if I click in there, you can even see it's sort of a drastic change with all of the curves.
Right.
But selection and changing with curves, and that's it.
So there's a lot of
So-
curves here, but I see basically you're using curves.
Exactly. And
Which
and
is
that's
one of my
what
favorite
I love.
tools as well.
Yeah, you get so much control, and I feel like that's your chance to put a signature on it. So I added in some stars that I just shot from my balcony, and this is the point where it's all edited. So at this point, this is when I would probably create an adjustment layer of curves and start to think about my personal color signature, which for me largely goes into the blue curve. And almost every image that I do, I'll add blue to the shadows and yellow to the highlights. Really drastically.
A cross-processy kind of look.
Yeah, and I think it looks a little bit more like film. Like there's less of a photographic feel to it. And I actually do the same exact thing for lighting with RGB. Like I'll just go right into the shadows and I will raise the shadows and I'll take the highlights down as well.
So that matte look.
Yeah,
that people
exactly.
love.
Really grayed out. And I've heard from a lot of people, oh, you can't do that because that's not real contrast. And I always add contrast back in just in the midtones so that still the highlights and the shadows are sort of skewed a little bit. I love that look. So that's always my go-to coloring and lighting step there. And then I add my texture. So I've got a texture here. I always use them in black and white. And I'll just really, really simply pull it in, drop it on top, make sure that it's stretched over the whole image. And once I've done that, I just have to choose how I want to blend it. And maybe I will choose soft light today and just see how that looks. And I think
You just play with it.
It's
Just
looking
like
good.
Go through different ones until it
Yeah.
looks right.
lower the opacity, do a lot of cloning, you know, to get rid of certain undesirable little
If there's
pieces.
too much over here or not enough over
Exactly.
there. Yeah. I
Yeah.
got it.
And so that's usually my final step. And because I'm using it in black and white, the color of the texture doesn't interfere with the coloring I've done before.
Right.
So it's nice and simple and just the final overlay.
Right.
But all of those steps combined give it a certain color, a certain lighting aspect, and ultimately makes it more painterly, which I love.
Thank you so much. That was really awesome.
My pleasure.
Well, thanks for coming by and showing us all this stuff, and thanks for the talk. It was really, really fun. I really excited about
me too.
getting activated to go out there and take all these pictures. And thank you for kicking my butt and getting rid of so many of my excuses.
You're
and
welcome.
hopefully, folks out there, you've also been excited about the things that you can do now. Come back again and see another episode of Make It.